translate that into the workplace. No longer should we be driven to perform without excellence. No longer poor ethics, corruption, theft. No more should we blame others, especially on corruption. And as for conflict of interest, like I said, my father once told me, you can lie to everybody else in the room except the person you see in the mirror. So we cannot pretend that we don't know what conflict of interest is. We cannot pretend so at all. I have thrown out so many examples in my attempt to simply convince you that if this guy from nowhere can do these things, then why not each and every one of you in this room? And remember that the last thing you want to do is worry about what people will say. In the long run, they will say the right things. That would be your legacy. That is what is most important. As I wind down tonight, I wouldn't be a credible professor of population studies if I didn't maneuver something from demography into this talk. As we change our mindsets and strive to build institutions that then become the platforms to create wealth for our people, we have to ask ourselves how sustainable this all is. How sustainable will it be if we don't address the rate of population growth? How sustainable will it be if we don't address women's relative lack of reproductive and sexual autonomy, which is a direct feed into the high rates of population growth? Can you imagine Malawi's population doubling, being 37 million in only 25 years? Or Lilongwe's population doubling in 15 years? Yes, I looked at the growth rates of the country and of the city of Lilongwe. And Lilongwe will double in 15 years if we don't start dealing with it. And in 15 years, I pray that we're all here to see it. And I pray that in the interim, we do something to change it. Imagine the cost of schooling, healthcare, housing. African governments have found some respite in this term called the demographic dividend, something that AFIDEP is a leader on. But to reap this dividend, we have to educate, train, improve the health of our large youthful population. And unless we start thinking about reducing the growth rate of that huge population, we're cutting ourselves a bigger job than we have to. So clearly, we also have to talk about population growth. Remember, part of our attitudinal change is that we should now be thinking into the future. And thinking into the future requires us to think about the numbers that are coming 15 years hence. And then there's also the impact of these numbers on the environment. 40 years ago, when I was growing up, when you heard that a country in Africa had a GDP growth rate of 3%, you thought that was a huge growth in the economic circumstances. These days, we get 7 and 8%, and we're just keeping up with the impacts of population growth. We need to curb population growth. So search your hearts and do the right thing, and the sooner we start, the better. I remember when the president, God rest his soul, asked me to work for him. He made sure that I understood his principles. And if you go and you read about President John Evans Atta Mills, you will recognize that he was distinguished in the ways he thinks about community and about our future. And I ask you to think in the same way. I know your heart, he said, so go and use good judgment. So search your hearts and go out and do the right thing. In closing, let me apologize for sounding like a preacher to you today. It's something I've always aspired to be and hopefully will be one day. I'm sorry for using you as guinea pigs. Thank you for your attention.